Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Community Cafe. I was waiting for everyone to kind of chime on in, but want to get started. It's great to see your faces. My name is LaQuisha Martin Hillian, and I will be your MC for today. Today, we will be discussing Mental Health Awareness Month. We have some great speakers lined up. We would like to let you know if you have any questions, you can definitely place that in the chat. Our wonderful Armani will be watching and monitoring the chat. She will also be placing additional information in regards to our speakers. So you can definitely follow that in the chat as well. So what we want to do is just chime on in and
Gracia, we lost you for a minute. If you can repeat that last part.
my apologies. I'm not sure where you lost me, but definitely we want to go ahead and start with our first speaker, Sherry McGinty.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Sherry McGinty. I'm a wife and a mother of 2 sons and a grandmother of 6. And hopefully our granddaughter is having our first great granddaughter, but she's in the hospital with preeclampsia. So we've got everybody send out prayers for her. I am now in my 42nd year as owner of Sherry School of Dance in downtown Morganton. When I look at all the pictures of the dancers on my walls these last 42 years, my wish is that they will never have to fight so hard to keep their loved ones alive for families like ours. My hashtag is SOS for SMI. I'm a member of NAMI South Mountain, also serve on the NAMI North Carolina Policy Board and the National Shattering Silence Coalition Policy Board. I have voiced our family struggles with the ISMIC Committee, the federal board from SAMHSA, the Interdependent Departmental Serious Mental Ill Coordinating Committee many times. This committee reports to Congress and federal agencies on issues related to serious mental illness. I am certified with NAMI for Family to Family program and the NAMI Home Front for Veterans. The book Insane Consequences, How the Mental Health Industry Fails the Mentally Ill by the late DJ Jaffe is a book pointing out failures in our mental health system, while it also suggests policy, social change to guide and make improvements. This has been my go-to book to share with anyone that can make a difference in our mental health care by providing a firsthand, in-depth knowledge of those suffering with a serious mental illness, a brain disease, and their families. Our local library has 2 copies. Those that I have provided books to also receive a copy of the Mother's Prayer, which I have shared with all our son's team, all his doctors, nurses, and social workers. My other go-to book is Tomorrow Was Yesterday, first person indictment of the U.S. mental health system's Mothers Across the Nation That Tell It Like It Is by Dee Renahan with 64 co-authors. My mother's story is page 126. This book can now be found in the Library of Congress 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I sent a chapter to each of our North Carolina House representatives along with the Mother's Prayer. I speak at CIT trainings, crisis intervention trainings, trainings for officers, firemen, EMS personnel to share the hours and years of firsthand knowledge of helping families like ours. I've also taken part in our Birth Collaborative, I was so happy to see so many people helping families from birth to 18 years old. Those over 18 tend to be left out with fewer resources. I've only had my remarks removed once from all my committee work, when I went off on a general during the ISMIC committee meeting, and he asked, why do they die so young, and he didn't know. Anesthesia is a brain illness causing lack of insight, and the medications they need will take 23 years off their lives. Suicide, when they are so manic that they will die, they want to die. When manic depressed, they can be a danger to self and others. Paranoid. The federal 988 number will only be as good as where families, police, sheriff, and EMS can divert them to. So I'm thankful for them for being there by my side. They can't say no either. While policies are important to me, is getting the health care that is needed. Serious mental illness is a no-fault brain disease. There's no stigma. It is not a crime. Not getting the supportive care is. For the last 16 years, 32 hospital stays, we have loved and fought to keep our beautiful mine alive, a veteran Marine. Getting guardianship was heartbreaking, but it allowed communication with his health care providers outside of HIPAA, participation in his treatment plans and medications while protecting his rights as a human being to be treated with respect and dignity. He has that 1% of the most serious no-fault brain illness that strikes the young, schizoaffective. He has survived through the manic, the paranoia, the delusions, and the manic depressive, and the PTSD of this disease. After he became a harm to himself and others, we finally got him to long-term care in one of our state hospitals. He is stable enough to live alone now, yet he is isolated. The one thing you learn with this illness is that it's very isolating for our loved ones living with a serious mental illness and living alone. In looking for help outside the hospital, I found the Fountain House Clubhouse located in the heart of New York City. We flew to New York to tour the clubhouse and then came home and located clubhouses in North Carolina. We visited Club Nova in Carborough, Threshold in Durham, Adventure House in Shelby, and the training center for the East Coast, Gateway Center in Greenville, South Carolina. So here we are now trying to start a Brighter House Clubhouse in our rural town. We put on hold for 2 years because of the pandemic. As I watched our government move mountains during the pandemic, and we thank you. Yet it was difficult to watch because families like ours have lived in a crisis mode for the last 50 years. We know what it's like to wait on a bed, a vaccine, and a cure. So please, if you don't have the power to end the IMD exclusion or to reclassify schizophrenia so this illness can receive the treatment and care that's needed, a 24-hour hold or a 72-hour hold is not enough time when your loved one is in psychosis. When our son experienced anesthesia, he became the Archangel Michael, and we have seen his adrenaline so high that he could stroke out. And if it is this difficult as a mom of a veteran Marine to get the mental health care that's needed, I really can't imagine what it's like for a single mom to go through this. And that kind of takes me, y'all are doing this, the stigma, and I haven't really put anything out there, but I will tell you this last gentleman in New York that died, that was murdered, and the police had 51, they knew this man, and he could not get the care that he needed. He was a man that was untreated with a serious brain illness. And this is the stuff that makes my nightmares. To see one of the scariest things of trying to help our son was to worry of what might have happened to him if he was to interact with others when he was in the midst of a psychosis. In a psychosis, the illusions, the paranoid are so very fixed for the person that it can be really difficult to talk with them at times. Our son would be forceful in wanting us to believe him that he was the Archangel Michael. And I really worried about what would happen if he ran into someone who didn't realize what was going on. I could see easily how an inner reaction could escalate if someone decided to argue with him. And the scary thing is that it can go on for a while before someone qualified for inpatient care. There is so much that could go wrong between someone slipping into psychosis before they could be admitted to a hospital for treatment. Even so, I really had never considered some random person would ever just murder him. This story brings a new thing to fill my nightmares. I know I'm not alone in this worry. With so many families like ours across the country, we need to do so much better than this. I hope the persons involved in the murder of this man who was sick with a serious mental illness, well, he was, and I hope that the treatment systems get fixed and reduce risk for folks living with a serious brain illness. And that kind of takes me now to California. NAMI California is proud to co-sponsor SB 43, and that's to kind of, they're helping to try to change the definition of gravely disabled, and that needs to get fixed. There are so many things wrong with this system for our kids that have a mental illness, and if we don't learn what they are and try to make a difference, it's never going to get changed. And, y'all are in a position, every one of y'all are in a position to like, okay, what is wrong with this system? If you work, I don't work in the system, so I know you see it 10 times more than I do. But if we don't start fighting for our families, it's never going to get better. And having a mental illness is not a crime. Jail and prison is not where they need to be. And so I'm a huge advocate of trying to find the things and then going after getting the change. And that takes a long time. But I feel like this illness has been around a whole lot longer than my son's been around, and things haven't got changed. So I feel like people aren't loud enough or work together enough to make sure we can get these changes. And so, but we've got a director for Brighter House, so we're going to hopefully get open soon, and we're very excited about that. And thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Ms. Sherry. Are there any questions for Ms. Sherry at this time?
One question we do have in the chat, I'll go ahead and read. We were wanting to know the first book you mentioned. We have The Mother's Prayer, and tomorrow was yesterday, but we missed the first one.
Insane Consequences. Insane Consequences, How the Mental Health Industry Fails the Mentally Ill by DJ Jaffe. And I give that, I have copies. I bought a whole case of them. I give them to our sheriff has one, our mayor has one. I give it to any politician. Both of my representatives have one. When I go to Raleigh, I give them one. I mean, it literally, and I gave them to the LMEO. When I went over to Broughton, there were a couple there from VIA Health. I gave them a copy, and he actually read it and emailed me back. But I think it really does. I know everybody, it really does take change and somebody saying this has got to stop, not just for my son, but for everyone's child or loved one, husband, wife. It just, we talk about the merry-go-round. It's not going to stop until we can get the care, because I'm telling you, 24 hours is not enough. 72 is not enough hours to help them to find the right medications, to get the mix, or, and it's just, and it's heartbreaking and it's exhausting for families. It is truly exhausting, and there's no help out there for us. If we can't trust, our police to help us sometimes, how hard it is to get a hold on somebody, I'm sorry, if somebody's got a mental illness and it's out there and it's documented in things and somebody harms them, it just breaks your heart. And seeing people murdered on the streets because they have a mental illness, that just tears you up. That could be my child, and that's the nightmares that you have. So, yeah, sorry.
Never apologize for feeling what you're feeling. Anyone else?
Jerry, I just want to say thank you for sharing. That's I appreciate the passion that you have behind it.
And I just want to say I greatly admire the work and the effort that you have put in. Your son has, and all individuals who share the same condition, your son, have a marvelous advocate in you. And if you've ever worked in the community at all, you know that these individuals who don't have an advocate, they cannot access care. Trying to access care for themselves is impossible. So while I'm glad to see that Sherry is in the position that she's in to advocate for a multitude of people and not just her son, we need to remember that we need to do more for outreach for these individuals who can't navigate the mental health system. As a therapist of many years, I have difficulty navigating the mental health system sometimes. So I think outreach for individuals who don't have that advocacy is extremely important as well. Thank you.
And in the chat, Sherry, someone says, thank you, Sherry, for sharing. Very powerful. And I agree, very powerful. Thank you for being an advocate for not only your son, but also individuals who are experiencing similar situations.
And we also want to say thank you for your transparency as well as Ms. Sherry. We would like to move on to our next speaker, which is Ms. Judith Chapel.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to join. My name is Judith Chapel. I work at Clearer Minds Counseling in Albemarle. We are a new private mental health agency. We treat adults and children. We are in an outpatient setting and enjoyed working with my partner here. Interesting story. Kathleen Hedgecock owns this business, and probably about 10 years ago, she was an intern of mine and at Monarch, and we worked together there for many years. So now my intern has successfully become her own counselor, opened a practice, and hired me as a contract provider. So just shout out to Kathleen Hedgecock and what she's done here at this agency. It's about 2 years old now, and we are busting at the seams. So we are accepting referrals as well. In my bio, you noted that I do a lot of group therapy. So I'm a strong advocate of group therapy. I believe in the power of group and seeing individuals come together and share similar stories and then similar recoveries as well. Helping each other through that is a marvelous thing to see. So I'm invited today to talk about the elderly, and in the words of Bill Engel, I can speak to this because I are one. So I'm very proud, and I see there are a lot of hair colors similar to mine on this platform today as well. So we stick around in the mental health world now. We don't like retirement, a lot of us, and we choose to continue to work. And what we found out, this is actually one of the benefits of keeping us stronger, keeping us motivated, keeping us active, is continuing to work. Turns out we're healthier when we work longer and don't go into immediate retirement. So I'm not going to tell you my age, but I could have retired many, many years ago, but chose not to because I do like being active and I do like being busy. So one of the pros of, advancing in aging is that acceptance of ourselves, acceptance of others as we get older. We have the desire for connectivity, and a lot of us have the means to accomplish that now. I keep telling my oldest child, who's just moved into a townhouse, that I'm happily going to move in with her, whether she wants me to or not at some point. So I believe in that multi-generational family because as senior citizens and as the elderly with grandparents, we have a lot to offer them. As Sherry alluded to, we have that, not only do we have that acceptance of self and others, we have a lot of life experience that lends itself to wisdom and empathy for others. And therefore, with all this under our belt, we are better decision makers most of the time. So we have that experience to lend as well. There are also, some issues with growing older as well. As you know, first of all, health issues kind of creep in on us. And one of the biggest ones, of course, is the lack of mobility or loss of mental faculties at some point. I think either one of those can be very detrimental for the elderly as they get older. And the other one that's concerning too is for some individuals, there's this loss of purpose. Their job was everything in their life, and now they've elected to retire and they can't quite figure out what their purpose is anymore, or it may take a while for that purpose to occur. And certainly as we live longer, we suffer some more losses sometimes. In growing older, we may lose a child, we may lose a spouse, and those are very difficult experiences for the elderly to go through, especially if they're alone or isolated, and they tend to kind of suffer in silence and suffer in isolation. So those are issues that we see coming into the office that we work very hard to deal with, as we do accept individuals, like I said, adult and older individuals in our care, in our office. So along with the health problems, loss of family members, sometimes loss of purpose, loss of mobility, and especially if there wasn't planning for the retirement, if the financial means aren't there, that can be an additional burden that the senior may be bearing on their own if they don't have those family supports around them. So while there's advantages to getting older, for sure, there's some disadvantages to getting older too, and being sure that as a mental health community, we are supporting them and reaching out to them. Some of the other issues, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes, is that we're also seeing a higher incidence of substance use in older individuals now. And with that higher incidence of substance use, as the bodies begin to break down, those drugs are not metabolized as readily in young people as they are in older individuals. So some of those problems can be seen reflected in their health and increasing mental health issues as well with substance use in the elderly. And one of the other interesting things, as Kathleen, the owner of the business, and I were talking about this conversation, is that there's a rise of sexually transmitted diseases in the senior citizen community. And that lends itself to stigma, about, what our bodies do naturally. And just because we get old doesn't mean we're not hot to trot and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we enjoy ourselves sexually, but unfortunately, those things are not looked at in the nursing home. The medical care can be lacking there, or just embarrassment to even talk about it, lack of transparency about it. So those are things in terms of supporting our elderly that we need to be mindful of. I was looking statistically, 73% of 57-year-olds to 64-year-olds are still sexually active. 53% are still sexually active at 65 to 74. And surprisingly, 26% are still sexually active at 75 to 85 years of age. So if you're young on this call, don't despair. Your sex life is looking good down the road, okay? So, but we're not here to talk about sex and all that. So I think one of the things that is most concerning to me in working and looking at the elderly population, and I don't know if there's any really good documentation on it yet. I did see where in the state of North Carolina, 1.6% of grandparents are now raising their grandchildren. And yeah, I didn't take a really deep dive into all the causes of that, but certainly I think that the opioid problem that we've had, particularly here in Stanley County, has created a hardship for parents who've gotten caught up in the substance use disorder, and Child Protective Services get called in. And then for the longest time, they've been trying to take those children out of environments where parents may be actively using, and there's not enough people to care for them. And then it falls back on a grandparent. And the grandparent wants to help. The grandparent wants to be available. They love that grandchild more than life in most cases. And so they take on raising this child. And the child can be anywhere from 8 to 10, 12 years of age. And as you know, chronologically speaking, that child is going to get older and become a teenager, and that grandparent is going to get older, less mobility, and maybe less financial assistance to care for that child. So this is something that I'm seeing, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it as well. We have thought about starting a group for senior citizens who are raising their grandchildren and seeing what we can do. Some have taken on temporary custody. Some have assumed full custody of their grandchildren. So I'm trying to check my time here real quick. Oh, great, I didn't start the timer. Another, see, this is one of the things, you forget to do some things. So if you guys can give me a clue about where we are time-wise. And again, just kind of wrapping it up, I think those were the points that I wanted to bring up and some of the things that we're looking at. And again, in North Carolina, there's 1.6 million grandparents raising their grandchildren or trying to assist in raising their grandchildren. So I would love to get your feedback on that as well, or any other thing that you see in Stanley County that Clear Minds can do to make a greater impact in the population of senior citizens. And thank you.
Thank you, Miss Judith. You were doing very well on time, but by the way, are there any questions for Miss Judith at this time?
You all
wanna-
can continue to put your questions and comments in the chat. Everyone says there's a lot of good feedback around the idea for the support group for the caregivers, the grandparents as caregivers. And also Cleveland County has a support group for grandparents that are caregivers.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Jude, just let us all know if what steps or anything that you do with moving forward on that. I can think of really like 4 grandparents that come to mind immediately where I'm just like, man, I just feel like this person needs to talk to other resources because she's navigating something really tough.
Absolutely. I'll keep you guys posted on that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Judith, I would say thank you so much for this additional information. Just kind of the aspect of individuals, older individuals becoming parents once again. I can't imagine the amount of anxiety and pressures to raise children, especially with everything being so technology based. Lack of resources, not being able to know what those resources are due to some of the mobility, not being able to get out, and just not being aware educational wise. And here's Stanley that there's very limited resources to link them to. So you have to be very creative in regards to that. And a lot of people, as far as older people, sometimes may feel that that's an embarrassment to reach out for help. So that support system, I strongly feel, will be a great component to the community so that they can know that they're not alone in feeling those things, because that can also bring forth some social isolations, as I'm sure you know that. And that is something that older adults can face with those losses, because we just kind of assume that just because they have had losses under their belt because they've lived longer doesn't mean that they're still able to accommodate those losses, because a loss is a loss, regardless if it's a person, place, or thing. So I do thank you so much for that information. And if there's no other questions, we're going to move forth with Gwen Prince.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, that was the part I was the most nervous about, honestly. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about things from a kids and families perspective. My name is Gwen Prince. Like they said, I work with youth villages in several counties that y'all have mentioned, actually. And we go into homes and work alongside families, trying to help them live successfully in the community. So thinking about mental health from like a child's perspective, I think it's really important for us just today to talk a little bit about like trauma versus stress. I'm going to use the terms trauma a lot. And honestly, like stress and trauma can be like used somewhat interchangeably. I think stress is stressing the system. That body is like ready to take on that. But an accumulation of stress, our bodies really aren't prepped for. And transparently, the social structure that we live in today is not what our bodies were designed for whatsoever. So a lot of our stress responses do become trauma because a lot of the things that we react to today are on a screen, and your body doesn't know the difference between a screen and real life. So just to set that stage here. So we work with a lot of kids in the child welfare system. And so 70% of our kids and families who are in the child welfare system have reported some complex trauma, which like has significantly means that they're having some internalized problems, traumatic stress, and they get some clinical diagnoses. So when you're talking to a kid, there's a pretty small bandwidth of like how long you can stay in that regulated system. And so when a kid is not stressed, you're going to be able to access some of your deeper thoughts. You're going to be somewhat thoughtful. You can start to think logically. And this would apply for adults as well. But then when you're stressed, your body's main job is to try to keep you alive. So it shuts down that prefrontal cortex at about 100 to 120 beats per minute. When your heart's hitting that rate, you are shutting down that prefrontal cortex, and you're not really doing a lot of thinking about like what is logical. Your body is going to try to keep yourself safe. So that's when you're going into those fight and flight responses. So all of those things can accumulate. And when a kid is moving through the world, you kind of try to picture them having something like an invisible suitcase. And so if you are not the primary caregiver of a kid, it's always a good thing to assume that you don't really necessarily know anything that's going on in that like invisible suitcase. And that if you say something that triggers a memory of something else, they might respond in ways where they're not necessarily saying these words, but they're kind of showing like they're reacting in a way that like, I think you're going to hurt me. I think this is all my fault. And I think it's important to remember that everything that they have in that invisible suitcase, they packed in a way to make themselves safe at one time. So when you start to pack your suitcase and it starts to get full, you don't always have the opportunity to build in some skills. And so a lot of the time, the kids and families that we work with, they do have some lagging skills where because their body and brain were working so hard to keep them safe, they didn't have the opportunity to think through and like build some of those prefrontal cortex skills. And it looks a lot like attention and working memory skills. You've got language and communication, emotion and self-regulation, social thinking, and cognitive flexibility. So why do I care? It's important to understand like what somebody's previous relationships have looked like. If you want to be able to get the best reaction and the best like kid in the moment, it's really important to understand a little bit of like what they might be reacting to, and that when you say something, when they open that invisible suitcase, what's flying out. And so whenever you like meet a kid, if they're not a kid that you know super well, it's really a good idea to kind of think about some of these things of like, do I know the answers to any of these questions? And if I don't, how can I treat them in a way that I don't assume that they've had like the best situations all the time? So at Youth Villages, we operate from a concept called collaborative problem solving. It's through thinkkids.org. And it basically, like the idea is that kids are going to do well if they can. We're trying to move away from the idea that somebody doesn't want to do something. It's more that like a lot of times they can't. If you told me today that you would pay me $1 million if I could throw a football across a football field, y'all know I'd be trying. I'd be trying so hard. I'd be out there practicing every single day. But unless somebody like brought a car onto that football field, I'm not going to get very far with my football. So really like what we try to do is like to break down those situations and be able to help our kids achieve the things that they want to do. No kid ever wants to be in a principal's office. Like no kid ever wants to be suspended for the most part. And if they do, it has something to do with like, they're not having a good situation. And so our goal is to like find those stressors and reduce them, find the unmet needs, and meet them, and then identify some of those skill deficits and teach them. So I'm going to just share a couple of things today, just like really quick interventions for regulation and skill building, because if you take home anything today, the important thing is that when you've got a kid who's flipped their lid and they are no longer in that logic brain, there's no, like, logic is done for the day. We really need to work to get them back to a regulated place so that they can skill build, which means, like, if you are yelling at a kid who's tantruming, none of it is hitting. There's a really great book, and it starts off talking about kids who have been sent to detention for really scary things. And the things that they hate the most is somebody being like, what were you thinking when you did that? Didn't you realize you would go to detention? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. I did the thing that I could that made the most sense at the time to keep myself safe. I wasn't thinking. So we want to be able to help our kids think. So affective expression. This is just talking about your feelings. Not all of our kids know exactly, and not all of our adults know exactly how to describe their feeling. And sometimes it's as simple as giving a kid the language. So, like, being able to help if somebody is trying to express, or you're seeing something that's really out of like touch with who they typically are, it's a good time to be able to like get them regulated and then be able to reflect on like how they were feeling in that moment. Just being able to identify the feeling can feel really helpful in being able to build somebody's communication skills. This is another really great regulation activity. It's just 5 senses. I think if your kid is frustrated, if you are frustrated, it is so helpful to identify what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're touching, what you're smelling, and what you're hearing. And just going through that exercise, it's really impressive to see sometimes of like, okay, I'm starting to regulate. It's a nice thing to be able to pay attention to. Progressive muscle relaxation. Oh, and I'm going to see if I can do this. So we've got a little bit of a worksheet here that I'll just show you really quickly. And I've shared this resource, but there are ways that we can teach our kids to progressively muscle relax. There's such activities like turtle, they can act these out, being an elephant, stepping on stomach, having a fly on your nose. And those are the only ones that it's going to let me show you right now, but I have shared this attached. Oh, here we go. There's a cat stretch and doing a little bit of that exercises. I also have included a script that you can use for somebody who's a little bit older. It really helps children to soothe and like naturally cope and like work on those things. It doesn't violate their boundaries, and it allows you to connect. Coping skills. Oh my gosh. I hear about coping skills all the time. And I will tell you the one thing that really like is important that you take away from this today as well is that if you don't teach somebody a coping skill, then they don't know it. Telling somebody to go use their coping skills is not helpful if you have your brain running as quickly as like your heart's going 120 beats per second. Like that's just not going to be helpful. What you need to do is like help build some activities that they enjoy, and then start to help prompt of like, hey, I know like last time when you were feeling really frustrated, something that works if we went and colored. Do you want to color with me? Hey, I know last time when you were frustrated, it really helped if you took a shower. Do you want me to go put on the hot water for you? Those are some really great ways that you can help youth cope. These are just like little tips to help you prepare, because I think the tough part about like being a person helping a person is that you're also experiencing the things in the same time. And so just knowing a couple of different phrases of being able to help think through like, you want to do something versus now we're going to do this, and then we could do this. That's a really helpful phrase. Thinking about time in versus time out. Sometimes a youth might need to connect. Sometimes a youth might really need space. And thinking about like what you're going to need in those moments is helpful for what intervention you're going to use. Rehearsing prior to the event. So one of the jobs I do is I talk to families like on call. And a lot of times when I have a kid who's like run away, we are talking to the family about how they're going to prepare when the kid comes home. Like, I know that you're really stressed and frustrated and worried. How are we going to make sure that that kid's going to be safe? How are we going to make sure that they're going to stay for the night? And I promise we're going to have the conversation about rules, rewards, and consequences as well. But just helping people prep and even helping yourself prep can help those things go a lot better. And then last but not least, I really wanted to just make sure we talk about self-care. There's a cycle of trauma. Your response can help like unpack somebody's invisible suitcase, which can lead to behavior problems in reenacting. It can also, your response can help them unpack the invisible suitcase with, or repack it with like really positive experiences, which might allow them to have a different response. But you can't do that like on your own. We all have like emotional piggy banks, and we can't give what we don't have. And so it's really important to like think about identifying your supports, knowing their availability, and how you can use them as support. These are some other parts to have in a self-care plan. And in this PowerPoint, these links will take you to a self-care starter kit as well as a self-care template. That's a summary brought to you by the PowerPoint program. But that's all I have for you. Thank you so much. I really appreciated it. And I can't see any of the chat box, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Gwen. We do have a question in the chat. Someone asked, with young kids age 7 to 8, is there a certain age when kids are able to use discernment and know how to make decisions like, if I just tell the adult they are hurting my feelings, they will stop saying that? Or is it okay not to know how to do that?
Ah, that's a really great question. So some of those lagging skills that I talked about at the beginning, our kids can present at different ages at different places. For instance, like I don't mind to share this about myself. I really, really struggle with some attention and working memory. I like will walk away from my car door, like with the car door open, which is so not appropriate for a woman in her mid-30s. So I think sometimes knowing your kid is really, really helpful, and being able to ask the question of like, hey, do you think that you're able to talk about when an adult is hurting your feelings? And then if they don't, like being able to help them build a skill. A lot of times it's just trying to get an idea of what their personal baseline is. And the nice thing about lacking skills is that they're skills and we can build them up. And so even if somebody is 7 or 8 and they're presenting as 3 or 4 on some of those things, that's not like a diagnosis forever. We can definitely work to improve those through helping a youth like regulate and then problem solve. I can see this one. I can see prefrontal cortex. Okay, so fully developed. They are saying that at this point it is like 24, 25. What does like, so that's what I know. And what it controls is it really controls some of that like really high level thinking, perspective taking, being able to plan things in advance. I think if you take a look at your dog or cat and you're like, this is a skill that person like that my cat or dog definitely does not have and never would be able to have, it's a good sign that you're starting to move towards that prefrontal cortex. So planning, reflection. My cat like asks for treats at 10 p.m. no matter what, and he doesn't remember whether or not he had them yesterday, and we could never have a conversation about why I forgot them yesterday. So those types of things in terms of like, hey, I know that I've gotten this reward before, I'll get it in the future if I do these types of things. That's like something that you could start to do at any age really, but at 24, 25, you're really starting to solidify like making those abstract decisions and trying to decide like morally, do I want to continue on this behavior path, types of things.
Does anyone else have any additional questions or comments?
I did have a quick question. So just for emotional regulation, I know you talked about for youth, but what types of things do you have for toddlers for the early years that parents can start to do?
So that sheet that I actually showed with those relaxing muscles, you can really start that with a toddler. There's also some things called, I think they're like coloring spots. They're like very big in the social work world, and they cost a lot of money, but it's not like something that you have to spend a lot of money on. It's something where even just identifying little circles with faces on them and helping somebody color of like, let's talk about what mad is. Let's identify last time you were mad. Have you ever seen anybody else be mad? Those are really good ways to just start building that language. I think something that we don't do early enough is teach people about their emotions and like that they're okay. Helping people identify their emotions. I think even sometimes in the grocery store, like if you see somebody being mad, just being able to say, oh man, that person's mad. I hope that they're able to figure out what they need. Those are really, really easy ways to be able to help somebody identify emotions and also like have a compassionate feeling about those emotions.
Thank you for that.
We'll make sure that the PowerPoint is shared with you as well, Shakira. I absolutely want you to have it.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think for me, I'm just going to add this one more piece. As a parent, my son is 22, but just kind of going back in my mind, I think for us, my son and I are very open in sharing our feelings. And what I was intentional about was to let him know, just because you're a boy doesn't mean that you can't cry. Just because you're a boy does not mean that you cannot express how you feel. That's human, that to feel whatever that is, and to be intentional with that. So expressing that to him, but what we don't realize is that our children, they're watching us. So when I am upset or however I want to express my feelings, I go to my journal first. And is kind of ironic that now that he's 22, I've noticed that's what he has. He has a journal. And that makes me feel good to know that is an outlet for him, but also to know that if at any point in time he can express that to me. So I think oftentimes when we try to shield our children, sometimes that can prevent them from their growth, in emotional growth. So to be transparent with that can be definitely a good tool to have.
Oh my gosh, LaQuisha, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, what an awesome parent. I just love the fact that you've been able to like have that awareness of like, if I don't take care of myself, if I don't go to that journal, like I know that the next step is like, I'm not going to be taking care of me, but also like I'm going to have my son like watching that. And like I get chills thinking about how awesome that is, just being able to both like verbalize something and then also like take that home to yourself. So just thank you for sharing.
Yes, ma'am. Would anyone else like to share or add anything? And if not, I will hand it off to Jerry.
LaQuisha, before you do that, Sherry has offered to read the Mother's Prayer for us.
Okay.
Thank you. I found this about 7 years into our son's illness, and I go back to it so many times through the years. A mother's prayer for mental illness. As I stumble from my bed this morning, help me to remember to be gentle and kind. My child's mind is shredding into a million pieces. He lives in a constant state of atrocious fear. I can see it in his eyes. Give him peace. Guide me as I hold him in my arms. Help me to know what to say, what to do. Fill my heart with healing love, understanding, and empathy. Give me the strength of 1,000 angels to hold back my tears. My heart is broken, and a tidal wave of grief is overwhelming me with the need to cry. Give me the strength to bear it long enough to keep it from disturbing my child. Help me find someone I can safely bring it to. Help me answer my family's questions with the same amount of compassion I would want for myself. Help me remember they are hurting too. This is an unwelcomed assault on an entire family. My heart is not the only heart that is broken. We all need time in each other to heal. As my journey becomes more and more isolated and lonely, remind me that the lack of involvement on the part of family and friends is not always because of the stigma or the ignorance. For many, it is because they are hurting too. They have the privilege of turning to their own lives. This is my family's life now. I must deal with it whether I am hurting or not. Send me the best physicians and healers. Give me the peace of mind as I walk through the exhaustion of the grief, to not settle for just anyone, no matter how tiresome the journey becomes. Help me adjust to the idea that although it appears my son is gone, there will be no goodbyes, and that he is still inside somewhere waiting for us to find him. Infuse the creative part of my mind with solution-oriented thinking. Give me hope. Even if it's just a glimmer of hope, a mother can go for miles on just one tiny glimmer. Let me see just a flicker of a spark of joy in his eyes. Guide my hands, calm my mind as I fill out the multitude of forms for services. Then help me do it again over and over. Provide me with the knowledge. Lead me to the books I need to read, the organizations I need to connect with. As we work through the people in my life, help me to recognize those that are here to help. Help me trust the right ones. Shine a light upon the right path. Give me the courage to speak my truth, to know my son's truth, and to speak for him when he is unable to do it for himself. Show me when to do for him what he is not capable of doing for himself. Show me when to do for him. Help me to recognize the difference. Help me to stand tall in the face of stigma, to battle the discrimination with the mighty sword of a spiritual warrior, and to deflect the sting of blame and fault finding from the ignorant and cruel. Preserve my love for my family. Shield my marriage with the wisdom of the love that brought us together. Protect him from homelessness, loneliness, victimization, poverty, hunger, hopelessness, relapse, drugs, alcohol, suicide, cruelty, and obscurity. Lead us to the miracles of better medications, better fundings, better services, safe and plentiful housing, meaningful employment, communities who care, enlightenment. Help us to find some way to replace all the greed with humanitarian work and intrinsic rewards again. Most of all, give me the strength to deliver whatever I can to the work of unmasking the man-made ugliness of this disease and revealing the human and all of its suffering beneath. Finally, when it is my time to leave my son behind, send 1,000 angels to take my place.
Thank you so much for that.
And that's what I gave every doctor, every nurse, every social worker, every politician, because that is a mother's prayer when you have a child with a serious mental illness. That's what we're looking for. Thank y'all for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And we have a question in the chat as to where the prayer can be found.
I have no clue. I don't know who wrote it. It went, when your kid's sick and stuff, you start searching everywhere. And I found it on some site for schizophrenia. It was her son had schizophrenia, and I found it years ago and printed it out. And I didn't have the name. It just blew me out of the waters, because that's exactly all the feels that I was feeling. And I think any parent would kind of be feeling the same way, because you're juggling not just your child, your work, and your whole family, and it just kind of put it there like, okay, we can do better. And so this is what I've shared with everyone.
But Gwen, you had the author's name, didn't you?
Yeah, I thought, but like it's a different. I knew a different. My mom had told a different prayer. It's the one that I'd known is not. It's like I'm like so blown away. I'm so glad that you shared it, because like I had in my mind this other like old prayer, and this is so wonderful and like specific.
Very.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It helped me stay strong a lot of times when I wanted to kind of just give up.
I mean, it's so specific. I mean, like to every step in the in that like cycle of mental health of all of those different key players.
Oh, somebody found it. Cool beans.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again, Ms. Sherry, for sharing that. And again, as she stated, that's in the chat if you would like to obtain that. And I would like to just pass this on over to Jerry.
Thank you all for coming. Abby, if I could ask you to let us stay on a little bit because there's several really powerful links in the chat box to give people a chance to grab those before we go. And I want to ask everybody, look around the room and don't look at so much who is here to hear the powerful stories that each person gave and the information shared, but look around and see who's not here. I think that's more important, because there's a lot of people not here, and we do record these and it will be on our YouTube page, but who's not here? These are designed for the broader community, so anyone can come to these, not just people in the field connected. Getting the message out to everyone is very important, and we really appreciate you all being here. But like I said, look around the room, who's not here, and I'll challenge each of you to try to invite 3 people, knowing that one of them will show up. Try to invite them to come to this next time and be a part of our wonderful community cafes for all of us. So June 28th at 10 a.m., we have our next community cafe, and it will be on a very powerful subject as well. And we all know what role animals play in our own lives. I bet if screens were on, I'd see a cat or a dog right up against someone. And we're going to be talking about that, the role that those animals play in therapy, and not necessarily formal therapy, but supporting us. And we're also going to look at how do we support those animals, because they do have feelings as well. So please join us June 28th at 10 a.m. for our next community cafe. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.